trapped in another airport. Along a winding concourse, there was hideous public sculpture and an afterthought of seasonal prints depicting young boys holding gourds. Overhead from several monitors at once, I heard the echoing voice of a perky blonde Cerberus advising us to barricade our rooms. A fighter jet was landing on a dollar bill. Outside, clouds, serene. Gaddafi had just been killed. The voice was taking credit. My headphones couldn't drown it out. It was addressing me, and what it was saying was, "You'll never be ready to join your friends." I understood that everyone around me was waiting for flights that never departed, that in fact the business travelers reading the paper and the families in Qdoba were dead. Like my father recently did. I couldn't turn the dial. I reached for my notebook. I hunched over and wrote, "In a complicated cross breeze, kept from where the tides go, 2 times you appeared to me. Once as a woodcutter with an axe about his neck. Later, unencumbered as a boy. Marin in halogen, a black security cloak around the graphics ranch. And in a passage commonly referred to as the physical interlude, I saw your body in Ireland. I saw your body at the dawn of time, punished for picking that lemon. Or in some other limbo, late America, come to me. You've already come. You with your tremors and your 3-toed cane. You with your unmerciful athletic beauty. Oh, in the peaks of the Trinity Alps. Oh, in the grave with thee, happily to lie. I put down my pen and I knew the title of the poem would have to be taken from Thomas Nash, that I should call it Sparrow Blasted, after, what did he say? Being blighted with a mysterious power of whose existence one is skeptical. Power like sorrow. But what a rake that Nash was. The cops went after him in 1590 just for calling his girlfriend Frankie in a poem. I read it softly out loud a few times to test the cadences. I mixed them in with what was on my headphones. Trina was singing All My Niggers Jump Around. And the song was so good, I ended up in that moment where I wonder if it's okay for me to be a nigger, you know? Never whiter than at that moment. The way straight people in the 90s used to ask me if they could be queer. I just don't know the answer to that question. Gradually, I realized the other travelers were staring at me, the dead who had been white, the dead who had been black. My blood ran cold. The voice on the monitor had turned its gaze upon me, too. I laid my pen in the fold of my notebook. Slowly, I removed my headphones. I never felt such shame. The voice said, "You can go now." Before I tell you what I found, let me mention what my friends were up against. First, other poets. The ones who've always said it's arrogant to have a politics. The ones who worry that we're going to spoil the last untainted thing. Then the police, bearing down on them on campus, later massed against them in the squares. Finally, capital, unconcerned with poetry, at least as long as poetry never became a metaphor for fighting back. For years, this meant my poems would settle on a mixture of defiance and wistfulness. Even on the plane or in the tunnel or however it was, I finally got to the Plaza del Sol. I could only write like this. I wrote, "Alone behind a blind, I watch the very rich emerge at night. Left-wing homos trapped between the manifesto and the novel of manners. There's like 6 of us. Illusory power of colored vapor to dissolve the material world. Cheap-ass zooms and crossfades. How they carol to you all adventure season, calling, come to Bali. But you only get as far as the edge of the West. Stock boys clearing out the inventory, marshweed swaying, the wires in your jacket starting to show. then you end up a minute or two ahead of the language. I mean, it took English like 200 years to come up with a no, right? And how long will that last? As long as the summer of Stieg Larsson. Hours, seasons, poetry doing its thing. That one had no title. What would you call it? How we went down to defeat in our poems. Later, how we didn't. Or in cafes, you'd listen to the outlines of a conversation and think, first date? Job interview? Then you realize, actually, they're working out a theory of value. A horrible one. So this one guy says to his frat brother, if this place goes to hell, I am out of here. Meaning Earth. And I'm supposed to be like, yeah, he's not so bad. He's just a fiscal conservative. There's a dial I can twist in two directions labeled more like Ovid, more like Boethius. I tried out conceptual art. I tried a sorry, bumbling meta for going back, but I kept going back to the troubadours. Later in that same cafe, this other guy was like, dude, I'm so glad I'm not in Egypt right now. Can that really be months ago? Turned into a serpent, reborn as a tree. Speak to me, philosophy. It's funny weather, warm for Brumaire. That one I called the kind, the blue, because only Couperin was enough to keep at bay that day in the sense I was alone. But that was an eternity ago. Let me tell you what I found. A breeze, a cough. And I was in a landscape like a landscape painted. We all were, an extensive one, and we could move around. Someone turned the dial and time passed back and forth through seasons, winter, summer, summer, winter, spring, fall, winter, fall. It settled on fall. Like little tercets, everybody staggered into place. There were groves, a forest, cities on a plain. A corner of the plaza had been labeled the year and ideas. Lisa scrawled, continuous language is the commons. Someone else had left a note that said, don't tase me, bro. And indeed, police were circling the area. But on every branch of every tree were candy wrappers, fortune cookies. Collis's read, Vancouver's got your back. Nathan's was a poem from Milan, Le giorni sono scuri ma noi abbiamo il fuoco. And this is not to mention the passenger pigeons. But after the fashion of the courteous medieval poets, I will spare you. Here, I omit 3,000 others who attended the bout. I'll pass over Andrew Kinauer saying, raise your hand if this is the most alive you've ever felt. I'll skip the part where little Sasha's holding up a sign for plutocrats that reads, you are mean, and I will have to cut you in half. And finally, I'll leave it to you to puzzle over the masked figures in the alleys leading to the plaza. They've been stenciling the dialectic, all in caps, but ran off halfway through the word. Reader, you know the story of the bloody battles that unfolded after. You know it better than I do, since they haven't happened yet. You know the stories of internal struggle, botched analysis, and tactical defeat. You'll have seen the faces of the women thinking, really? I still have to remind you not to grope me in the commune? You'll have noticed that the names are generally the names of white people. But none of this will make me wish I were with you any less. As I fade into time, as I enter my era, I've accepted that my mind works best when imitating vantages of paradise. With you in the square that day, I saw the thimble where the mind is. Like the briefest waterfall behind my eyes, I saw the ocean where the thimble was. And on the final page of the bright red book that dropped into the plaza, I read the words, true freedom will always lie in the ability to make friends. I felt the scratch of wool. My dream was ending. Lisa, Jeffrey, dialing time around an axis. Thank you. Names of months, the names of years. I felt the warmth of Rod beside me. And reaching down into the world as it took shape again, I felt, what were they? Right. The dollars in my pocket. Thanks very much, everybody.